Malik Johnson was 35 years old and the kind of man business magazines loved to showcase on their glossy covers. From Atlanta, he had built a powerful tech empire with a rare combination of brilliance and ruthless focus. His name appeared constantly in the news, not only for his company's innovations but also for the silence surrounding his personal life. To the world, he was the perfect bachelor billionaire, tall, commanding, and with a gaze that could silence boardrooms. But behind that sharp exterior lived a man who no longer trusted love. Years earlier, Malik had fallen deeply for a woman who seemed to care for him, only to discover she had been using him to climb the tech ladder. That betrayal carved a scar no wealth or power could heal. Since then, he taught himself to compartmentalize. Love was a distraction, emotions were liabilities, and only the company mattered. With his IPO approaching, he embraced that philosophy more than ever. His board of directors, however, had other priorities. Investors wanted stability, and the media wanted a story that humanized their enigmatic CEO. Each quarter, questions about his bachelor status grew louder. Reporters cornered him with inquiries, gossip blogs speculated about affairs, and shareholders hinted that his lack of a family image could lower the company's valuation. Malik resisted, but the pressure was relentless. He realized that in business, even personal choices could turn into negotiations. Across Atlanta, Amara Daniels was fighting her own battles. At 24, she studied for her master's degree while working exhausting shifts as a waitress in a cafe near Clark Atlanta University. Life had never been easy, but recent years had been especially cruel. Her father, a beloved high school teacher in Birmingham, had passed away suddenly, leaving behind heavy debts. Her mother's health declined soon after, demanding constant care, and her younger brother was diagnosed with a heart condition that required surgery in Houston. The medical bills were suffocating. Every paycheck Amara earned went straight to hospital accounts, but it was never enough. By day, she carried her books to class, and by night she served coffee with aching feet, wondering how much longer she could keep her family afloat. When the proposition came, it felt unreal. Through a chain of contacts, she was introduced to representatives of Malik Johnson. The offer was simple and blunt. Enter a marriage contract with him for 1 year, maintain the image of a loving wife in public, and in return all her family debts would be erased and her brother's surgery would be fully covered. It sounded like a movie, but the signatures and legal documents were real. Amara hesitated, terrified at the idea of marrying a stranger, but the faces of her mother and brother haunted her. What choice did she truly have when the alternative was watching them collapse under the weight of debt and illness? Malik approached the arrangement with the same detachment he used for corporate acquisitions. To him, Amara was not a partner in love, but an ally in a performance. Their first meeting was in a private office high above the Atlanta skyline. The air smelled of polished wood and leather, the kind of place where billion-dollar mergers were finalized. Malik's unreadable eyes fixed on her as the lawyer slid the documents across the table. Amara's hands trembled as she held the pen. She had promised herself she would stay strong, but the moment felt unbearably heavy. She was about to trade her freedom for security, stepping into a role that would define her to millions who would never know the truth. The contract was clear. 1 year of marriage, appearances at events, no public disputes, and a promise of privacy afterward. Malik's lawyers had covered every angle. She signed slowly, her heart pounding. When the pen left the paper, it felt like a door had closed behind her. Malik added his signature swiftly, placing the pen down like it was just another transaction. Their eyes met briefly. No affection, only acknowledgement that both had made choices serving their separate needs. Outside the window, Atlanta stretched across the horizon, glittering with ambition and indifference. Two lives shaped by pressure and necessity had just been bound together, not by romance but by ink and obligation. Neither Malik nor Amara knew it yet, but the story they had entered would not follow the clean lines of a contract. It would twist, it would challenge, and it would force them both to confront truths they had avoided. For Malik, it was the illusion that he could live without love. For Amara, it was the belief that sacrifice alone could save her family. That evening they left as strangers holding signed papers. To the world, they were about to become husband and wife. To themselves, they were simply two people carrying secrets, stepping into a performance neither fully understood. And though Malik believed emotions could be managed like stock, and Amara believed survival demanded surrender, The first step of their journey had already begun to weave feelings neither of them had planned. The marriage contract was signed, and within hours the headlines exploded. Billionaire tech mogul Malik Johnson marries mysterious graduate student. Paparazzi swarmed the Midtown penthouse, and online forums erupted with speculation. Some called it a secret love story. Others sneered she was a gold digger who had struck gold. For Malik, it was just noise, another storm to weather for the sake of his corporate image. For Amara, it was overwhelming, like being thrown into an ocean with no time to breathe. The headlines spread faster than either of them expected. Tech mogul Malik Johnson marries mysterious graduate student. News outlets plastered their photographs across front pages, social media feeds erupted with speculation, and television anchors debated whether the marriage was a love story or a calculated stunt. Some praised Malik for finally settling down. Others called Amara a gold digger who had hit the jackpot. For Malik, it was nothing more than noise. He had weathered storms before, and this was just another distraction to ignore. For Amara, it was terrifying. Overnight, she went from being an anonymous graduate student to the most scrutinized bride in the country. Paparazzi camped outside the Midtown penthouse, snapping photos of her every move. Online forums dissected her past, digging into her college records, her social media, even blurry photos from her childhood. Each cruel headline felt like a blade, cutting deeper into her resolve. She wanted to scream the truth, that she had sacrificed everything for her family. But the contract demanded silence, and her pride demanded strength. The penthouse Malik brought her to was unlike anything she had ever seen. A glass tower overlooking Piedmont Park, filled with rare art, marble floors, and books collected from around the world. At night, the city lights shimmered like diamonds scattered beneath their feet. It was breathtaking but also cold, a place built for power rather than warmth. On her very first night there, Malik handed her a typed list of rules. She was to avoid scandal, never speak to the press without clearance, attend corporate galas and charity dinners as his wife, and above all, maintain the illusion of a perfect marriage. There was no mention of affection, no promise of companionship, only instructions to preserve the image. Amara nodded quietly, clutching the paper in her trembling hands, and told herself she had to endure just 1 year. 1 year for her brother's surgery, 1 year to keep her family alive. Malik treated her with the same efficiency he used with his executives. Breakfast meetings at 7, conference calls with Silicon Valley by 9, board reviews at 11. He gave her a schedule of appearances that included art auctions, black-tie dinners, and charity galas. He told her what to wear, where to stand, when to smile. Sometimes she felt like nothing more than a mannequin dressed for display. Yet in fleeting, unexpected moments, his icy exterior cracked. One evening, Amara sat on the balcony video calling her mother. Her mother's hair had thinned from treatments. Her voice was weak but warm as she told Amara not to worry. Tears welled in Amara's eyes as she whispered promises to stay strong. Malik passed by on his way to his office, pausing when he heard her quiet sobs. He didn't say a word, but something in his gaze lingered before he walked away. For the first time, Amara wondered if he was capable of understanding pain. The press was merciless. Tabloids ran headlines like, "From coffee cups to couture, the girl who sold herself for luxury." Strangers online tore apart her life, branding her a social climber. She bit her tongue and endured. The contract demanded it, and so did her pride. Malik remained distant in public but precise in appearances. At a charity gala, he held her hand for the cameras, their smiles rehearsed. Yet she noticed his thumb tapping gently against her knuckles, a small rhythm that almost felt like reassurance. At another event, a reporter pressed too hard, asking if Amara had married for money. Malik's eyes hardened instantly, and he cut the interview short, guiding her away before she could answer. For the first time, she felt protected rather than displayed. Days turned into weeks, and Amara began to learn the rhythm of life inside Malik's world. She noticed when he liked his meetings uninterrupted, when the kitchen filled with staff, and when she could slip away to the rooftop garden just to breathe. Slowly, she discovered fragments of his humanity. A worn guitar tucked in the corner of his study, a photograph of him as a boy with his parents hidden inside a leather book. Each discovery made her curious, though she reminded herself that curiosity was dangerous. Malik noticed her too. She wasn't extravagant with the allowance he gave her. Instead of designer clothes, she bought textbooks and care packages for her mother back in Birmingham. He saw receipts left on the counter, modest purchases rather than greed. It confused him. He had expected manipulation, the same hunger for status he had seen in so many others. Instead, he saw restraint, devotion, and sacrifice. Still, mistrust ran deep. He told himself it might all be an act, that she had studied the contract and decided to play the perfect role. At night, when he looked across the dinner table at her quiet, graceful presence, he felt a pull he couldn't explain. She lived under his roof, but she was still a stranger. Amara, meanwhile, felt the exhaustion of living two lives. By day, she was the billionaire's wife, standing beneath chandeliers with cameras flashing. By night, she was a daughter and sister, calling hospitals, sending school assignments, holding on to the pieces of the girl she used to be. The contrast drained her, but she carried it because she had no choice. Slowly, both of them began to soften. Malik asked her opinions on small things, like which tie looked better for an important meeting. Amara discovered his dry sense of humor on rare evenings when he allowed himself to relax. One night during a thunderstorm, the power flickered out, and they ended up in the kitchen with candles sharing leftover takeout. It was simple, unplanned, and for the first time real, but every morning the walls went back up. Malik reminded himself it was only a contract, nothing more. Amara reminded herself it was temporary, a bargain for survival. Yet something unspoken had begun to form in the quiet spaces between rules and appearances. Something neither dared to acknowledge, but both could feel growing stronger. The wedding was never about love, and everyone who mattered knew it. Malik Johnson's public relations team had orchestrated every detail with military precision. The venue was a historic hotel in Los Angeles, chosen not for sentiment but for optics. Chandeliers glittered above polished marble. Crystal glasses caught the light, and 1,000 cameras waited to capture the union of a billionaire mogul and his mysterious bride. Investors and celebrities mingled with journalists, each guest calculating their own stake in the spectacle. For Malik, it was another step in his business plan, one more move to secure stability before the IPO. For Amara, it was a whirlwind she could barely process. Standing before the mirror in her gown, she barely recognized herself. Makeup artists assured her she looked stunning. Stylists adjusted her veil. But inside, her heart pounded, and all she could think of was her mother and brother back in Birmingham, watching the live stream and clinging to the hope that this sacrifice would save them. When she walked down the aisle, Amara felt the weight of every stare. Reporters whispered, flashes burst, and in the crowd, investors murmured numbers as though the ceremony were a stock announcement. Malik stood waiting, flawless in his tailored suit, his expression composed and unreadable. To the world, he looked like the perfect groom. But Amara noticed the absence of warmth in his eyes. Their vows were short, rehearsed, spoken more for microphones than for each other. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, she felt the cold weight of metal instead of the warmth of his hand. The applause that followed sounded hollow, like clapping at a business presentation. The reception was a lavish affair that trended worldwide within minutes. Hashtags spread across social media, clips of their kiss replayed in slow motion, and strangers online argued about whether she was a fairy tale bride or a fraud. Amara forced a smile as she greeted guests who spoke to her as though they knew her life story. Champagne sparkled in glasses. Laughter echoed across the ballroom, but every whisper she overheard carried judgment. She married for money. She trapped him. She won't last a year. Each word cut deeper. Yet she kept her back straight and her smile fixed. Malik noticed the stiffness in her shoulders but said nothing. He performed flawlessly, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, and deflecting questions with charm. To the cameras, they were a dream couple. To themselves, they were strangers playing roles. Later, in a quiet corner away from the crowd, Malik leaned close and whispered in a voice meant only for her. Do not let them see weakness. If the press digs into your past and finds anything, it won't just hurt you, it'll hurt the company. His words felt more like a warning than advice. Amara's pulse quickened, and though she whispered, I have nothing to hide, his doubtful glance cut deeper than the gossip of strangers. The night blurred together. They cut the cake, posed for photographs, and endured endless toasts. Malik maintained his stoic mask while Amara felt more and more like a porcelain doll put on display. Even when he placed his hand at the small of her back, The touch felt mechanical, designed for the flash of cameras rather than intimacy. During the evening, a few old classmates from college managed to approach her, half mocking and half curious. "So it's true. You really married the billionaire? Was it worth it?" They laughed lightly, but their eyes were sharp with judgment. Amara forced a laugh, though her stomach twisted. She wanted to tell them about hospital bills, about sleepless nights and crushing debt, but the contract and her pride kept her silent. She smiled until her cheeks hurt while their laughter echoed in her ears. From across the room, Malik watched, his jaw tight. He knew what people were saying. He had already hired investigators who confirmed she had no scandalous past, but suspicion was carved too deeply into him. Trust was not in his vocabulary. When the night finally ended and the last guest departed, Amara collapsed into the car beside him, exhaustion washing over her. The city lights blurred through the tinted windows as silence filled the space between them. She turned, hoping for some recognition, some small kindness after enduring the endless judgment. But Malik stared straight ahead, his profile as cold as stone. "You did well," he said at last, his tone flat, almost like a performance review. Amara wanted those words to mean something more, but instead they hollowed her out further. The drive back to the penthouse stretched long, filled with questions she dared not ask. Malik adjusted his cufflinks, already thinking about the next morning's market reaction. They were husband and wife in name, but still strangers in truth. That night, Amara lay awake in the vast bed of the penthouse, staring at the ceiling while the hum of the city filled the silence. She thought of her family, the sacrifices she had made, and the man beside her who felt more like an employer than a partner. Malik slept with steady breaths, his mind already locked away behind walls of control, yet in the shadows of that room, tension coiled tight, waiting for the moment it would finally erupt. When the car doors closed behind them and the city slipped into the blur of neon lights, Malik Johnson leaned back in silence, his mind already shifting to obligations of tomorrow. For him, the wedding had been another calculated move, a strategic act to stabilize his company's image before the looming IPO. He was used to compartmentalizing emotions, sealing them into boxes he never opened. This marriage to him was just another deal. Tonight was supposed to be nothing more than ceremonial formality. Beside him, Amara Daniels sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her pulse still racing after hours of being on display. Relief washed over her now that the endless ceremonies were finished, but dread quickly followed. What awaited her in Malik's penthouse was unknown, and that fear pressed heavy in her chest. The sleek car carried them through Atlanta's streets and into the clouds of Midtown, before stopping at the glass tower Malik called home. They stepped into the private elevator, rising silently to the top floor. When the doors opened, the air inside the penthouse was still and immaculate, filled with the faint scent of cologne and polished wood. Staff had decorated the space with roses and champagne, a scene designed to suggest romance, but the atmosphere remained heavy, formal, and cold. Malik removed his jacket and poured himself a glass of scotch, every movement deliberate and controlled. He handed Amara a flute of champagne and raised his own without enthusiasm. "Two appearances," he said evenly. She clinked her glass against his, though her throat was too tight to swallow. His eyes studied her carefully, calculated rather than tender. "This is part of the contract," he reminded her, his tone calm but firm, as though both of them needed to hear it. Amara nodded faintly, her chest tightening with unease. He moved closer, his presence towering in the silence. The golden light of the city streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting shadows across his sharp features. When his hand brushed against her arm, her entire body stiffened. He felt her hesitation immediately, a tremor that told a story words had not. He paused, his eyes narrowing. "What is it?" His voice was low, measured. Amara's face flushed with fear and shame. She had tried to prepare herself for this night, convincing herself it was duty and not desire, but nothing could have prepared her for the truth she carried. Her lips trembled as she whispered, barely audible, "I've never." Her voice broke and she turned away, tears blurring her vision. Malik froze, her words striking like lightning. She had never. She was untouched. The realization stunned him. The woman the world mocked as a gold digger, the woman he had assumed had sold herself for money, had never been with anyone at all. Confusion and disbelief surged through him. He stepped back slightly, gripping the counter for steadiness. For a man who thought he had seen every angle of human manipulation, this revelation unsettled him more than any betrayal. Amara covered her face with her hands, ashamed. "I'm sorry," she whispered through tears. "I thought I could go through with it, but I can't pretend." Malik's chest tightened. He had expected calculation, maybe even seduction born of ambition. Instead, he saw vulnerability, sacrifice, and innocence. He remembered overhearing her quiet sobs on the balcony, her voice breaking as she promised her mother to stay strong. That memory rushed back with new meaning. He set down his glass and walked toward her slowly, his tone softer. "Why did you agree to this marriage if you had never—" His voice trailed. Amara lowered her hands, her eyes glistening with truth. "Because my brother needs surgery. Because my mother is sick. Because I couldn't watch them fall apart. I told myself I could sacrifice myself if it meant saving them." Her words trembled, but her conviction was undeniable. For the first time in years, something broke inside Malik's armor. He reached out gently, his hand resting on her shoulder. She flinched, but when her eyes met his, she saw no anger, only a man torn between disbelief and empathy. His voice, for the first time since their agreement, carried warmth. "You shouldn't have to carry this alone." Amara shook her head, tears falling freely. "You don't understand. I had no choice." Malik wanted to argue, to remind her that everyone had choices, but the conviction in her voice silenced him. She had chosen sacrifice over selfishness, dignity over deceit. Something shifted between them in that moment, invisible but undeniable. He didn't touch her again. Instead, he guided her gently to the sofa and handed her a folded handkerchief. They sat together in silence, the hum of the city below filling the room. Malik stared out at the skyline, wrestling with emotions he had buried long ago. He had built walls to keep betrayal out, but now those walls felt fragile. Amara sat curled on the sofa, weeping softly. But as the words spilled from her, she felt a strange relief. She had spoken her truth, and though she feared judgment, she found none. When she looked at Malik, she saw not just the cold CEO, but a man haunted by conflict. Eventually he spoke, his voice steady, yet different. "I thought tonight was just another transaction, another line in a contract. But you are not what I expected." Amara twisted her hands in the fabric of her dress. "I'm sorry if I ruined your plans." To her surprise, Malik gave a quiet laugh, a sound even foreign to him. "Maybe my plans needed to be ruined." They stayed there until exhaustion softened the edges of their thoughts. Malik finally stood and offered his hand. "Come, you should rest." She hesitated before placing her hand in his. He led her to the bedroom but didn't cross the invisible line between them. Instead, he pulled a blanket around her shoulders, adjusted the pillow, and whispered, "Good night, Amara." Her eyes widened at the kindness in his tone. "Good night, Malik," she replied softly. When he left the room, she lay awake, replaying every moment. The man she thought incapable of compassion had surprised her, and Malik, lying in his own room, stared at the ceiling, haunted by what he had discovered. The contract was no longer simple. This woman he had married for appearances carried secrets of strength and innocence that unsettled his entire worldview. He felt protective and conflicted, emotions he had sworn never to feel again. Outside the windows, the lights of Atlanta shimmered endlessly, unaware that inside its highest tower, two strangers bound by ink were beginning a journey neither had anticipated. The night meant to be routine had turned into something fragile, something unexpected, something that hinted at love hidden beneath fear and duty. Malik closed his eyes, heavy with confusion, while Amara whispered into the darkness, not knowing if he could hear her, "Thank you for not forcing me." Neither of them slept peacefully, but both knew the ground beneath them had shifted forever. The morning after the wedding night dawned with pale light spilling through the penthouse windows. Amara awoke with a strange mix of relief and unease, remembering every detail of the night before. She touched the blanket Malik had placed over her shoulders and wondered what it meant. Was he softening, or was it simply another layer of control? When she walked into the kitchen, Malik was already there, perfectly dressed for meetings, his tie straight, his expression composed. He handed her a crisp sheet of paper. "These are the events we'll attend this month. You're expected to accompany me." His voice was calm but distant, the same tone he might use to brief an assistant. Amara wanted to ask about the night before, about the look in his eyes when he realized the truth, but the words stayed trapped in her throat. In public, their lives became a spectacle. Photographers crowded sidewalks, flashes exploding whenever they stepped out. Headlines screamed about the new billionaire bride. Online forums debated whether Amara was a saint or a schemer. Malik seemed unaffected, gliding through the storm with practiced indifference. But Amara felt every whisper, every stare. She avoided social media, but gossip found its way to her in strangers' eyes and careless remarks. At a charity luncheon, a reporter cornered her. "How does it feel to marry into billions? What did you sacrifice?" Amara froze, panic rising in her chest. Before she could answer, Malik appeared at her side, his arms sliding around her waist, his voice calm but cutting. "My wife doesn't answer to gossip." He guided her away firmly, leaving no room for questions. For the first time, she felt a flash of safety, a moment where his protection was real. That night, she replayed the moment in her mind. She wanted to believe he cared, but part of her wondered if he was only protecting the company's image. The contradiction left her restless. The weeks pressed forward and Malik began noticing her in ways that unsettled him. She never spent his money recklessly. Instead, she quietly wired funds to a hospital in Houston. He pretended not to notice, but suspicion lingered. Why would she funnel so much money there? His instinct whispered secrecy, and in his world, secrecy meant betrayal. One evening, he confronted her over dinner. "You've been making payments, to whom?" Amara's fork stopped midair, her pulse spiking. "Just family expenses," she said softly, her eyes lowered. "What kind of expenses?" His gaze sharpened. "It's personal." Her refusal stirred anger in him. In Malik's world, secrets were poison. His tone went cold. "If you live in my house under my name, there will be no secrets." Amara met his eyes, defiance flashing through her fear. "I didn't marry you for your permission. I married you for survival." The air between them burned. Malik's jaw tightened. He stood abruptly, his footsteps echoing through the penthouse as he walked out, leaving the door to slam behind him. Alone at the table, Amara's appetite vanished. Tears threatened, but she held them back. She hated lying, but she couldn't bring herself to explain. The truth, that her brother lay in a hospital waiting for life-saving surgery, felt too vulnerable to expose. She feared Malik would see her family as weakness, as leverage, and she couldn't bear the thought of him using it against her. But every unspoken word widened the distance between them. The conflict seeped into their public appearances. At a midtown gala, they stood side by side, their smiles perfect for the cameras, but their silence deafening. To the world, they looked like the perfect couple. Beneath the glittering chandeliers, they were anything but. Later that night, Amara retreated to her room, locking the door behind her. Malik stood outside, his hand hovering near the knob, torn between demanding answers and walking away. In the end, he chose silence, but inside a storm raged. Even in his anger, he couldn't forget the memory of her trembling confession on their wedding night. He wanted to believe she was different, but scars from his past whispered distrust. Amara wrestled with guilt. Each day, she wired money to Houston, praying her brother would live long enough for the surgery. She wanted to tell Malik, to let him see the real reason behind her choices, but fear sealed her lips. Instead, she carried the burden alone, while suspicion and silence wrapped tighter around their fragile bond. The cracks in their fragile arrangement widened as the outside world circled like vultures. Malik Johnson had enemies, competitors in the market, rivals who envied his success, men who waited for weakness. Among them was Darius Shaw, a former partner turned bitter adversary. Years ago, Darius had stood beside Malik in the early days of the company, but when Malik refused to compromise his integrity for profit, Darius walked away and built his own empire on ruthless deals and media manipulation. When Darius heard about Malik's sudden marriage, he sensed opportunity. He began leaking stories to the press, planting rumors that Amara Daniels was not who she seemed. Anonymous sources whispered that she had a hidden past, that she was a scam artist targeting lonely billionaires. Blogs amplified the rumors until mainstream outlets picked them up. Headlines blared, "Billionaire's bride exposed as gold digger?" The damage was immediate. Investors grew uneasy, board members demanded answers, and Malik's company stock faltered. Fury coiled inside him. Every headline was a dagger, not only against him but against the empire he had built from nothing. At the penthouse, the air grew colder. One night, Malik tossed a newspaper onto the counter, Amara's face glaring back at her from the front page beneath a brutal headline. His voice was low, dangerous. "Tell me the truth. Are you using me?" Amara's hands shook as she picked up the paper, her throat tight. "No," she whispered, but she couldn't bring herself to explain the hospital transfers. Her silence enraged him. He slammed his fist against the counter, the sound echoing through the room. "Investors are doubting me because of you. Do you understand what this means?" Tears stung her eyes, but she stood her ground. "I never asked for this attention. I never wanted cameras or rumors. You chose this arrangement. I accepted it to save my family." Malik's jaw tightened, his gaze sharp. "Family, always family. What are you hiding?" Amara turned away, her voice breaking. "I can't tell you." That answer cut him deeper than any insult. In his mind, secrecy equaled betrayal, and betrayal was poison. Without another word, he stormed out, leaving her trembling in the kitchen. Days passed in a haze of hostility. In public, Malik maintained appearances, his hand at her waist, his smile precise. But in private, he barely spoke. Amara moved through the penthouse like a ghost, weighed down by fear. Each day, she worried about her brother in Houston, his surgery delayed as bills piled higher. Every transfer she made to the hospital felt like another knot in the rope, pulling tighter around her throat. Meanwhile, Darius escalated his attacks. He went on television, smiling sharply as he insinuated that Malik's wife had a history of deception. He produced doctored photographs and false testimonies, painting Amara as a fraud. Investors whispered about withdrawing. Journalists demanded interviews. Malik's company stock wavered dangerously. He summoned his legal team, but lawsuits took time, and time was something he didn't have. Alone in his office late at night, Malik stared at photographs of Amara, laughing softly on the balcony while speaking to her mother. He wanted to believe she was genuine, but doubt gnawed at him. Was Darius right? Was she playing a deeper game? Yet another part of him remembered her wedding night confession, the tears she shed when she admitted she had never been with anyone. That memory clashed with suspicion until his chest ached. Amara felt the distance growing sharper. One evening she approached him, her voice fragile. "Malik, please. You need to trust me." His eyes, once softened for her, were hard again. "Trust is earned, and you've given me nothing but secrets." Her breath caught. She wanted to scream the truth, to tell him about her brother fighting for life in a hospital bed. But fear silenced her. If he saw her family as weakness, he might use it against her. She refused to let him think she had entered this marriage to drain him. The silence stretched between them, filling every corner of their lives. The media frenzy grew worse. Paparazzi hounded her at grocery stores, shouting cruel questions. Strangers online spread lies, and every word felt like another stone added to her shoulders. Amara retreated further into herself, exhaustion carving shadows under her eyes. She prayed for strength, but inside she was breaking. Malik, too, was unraveling, though he hid it behind his armor of control. Each attack from Darius felt like history repeating itself, betrayal lurking in familiar shadows. His company was at risk. His heart was conflicted, and the woman he wanted to believe in remained a mystery. It was a storm neither of them could escape, a storm that would soon force the truth to the surface, whether they were ready or not. The storm reached its peak on a night when rain lashed hard against the penthouse windows, and thunder rolled across the Atlanta skyline. Malik returned home from another brutal board meeting, where shareholders openly questioned his judgment and whispered about pulling their support. His chest burned with anger, his jaw set tight. Inside the penthouse, he found Amara sitting alone in the dimly lit living room. Her shoulders hunched, her face pale, and the television muted as headlines scrolled across the bottom of the screen with her name attached to words like scammer and fraud. The sight pushed Malik past the breaking point. He shut the door sharply and walked toward her, his voice cutting through the silence. "Enough, you're going to tell me the truth right now." Amara's eyes widened, fear flickering. She shook her head, her lips trembling. Malik's jaw tightened. "No more secrets. Who are you sending money to? Why do you keep hiding from me?" His words carried both accusation and hurt. Amara's chest rose and fell as if she were drowning. For weeks she had carried the weight of silence, the fear of being misunderstood. But she couldn't hold it anymore. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she finally broke. "It's my brother," she sobbed. "He's in Houston in the hospital. He needs heart surgery and we couldn't afford it. That's why I agreed to this marriage. Not for your money, not for myself, but for him." Malik froze, her words piercing through his fury. His anger drained, replaced by shock. He stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. Amara covered her face, crying harder. "Call me a liar, call me a gold digger, call me whatever you want. But I would do anything, even let the world hate me if it means my brother lives." The raw honesty in her voice struck him deeper than any rumor. Shame pressed down on his chest as he realized what he had accused her of. She had been carrying a burden of love and sacrifice while he assumed deception. But even in that revelation, his old scars whispered doubt. He turned away, pacing toward the massive windows as lightning lit the city beyond. Rain streaked down the glass, mirroring the storm inside him. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to take away her pain. But trust wasn't something he could summon on command. Memories of betrayal clawed at him, warning that love was weakness, that vulnerability invited ruin. Behind him, Amara's sobs filled the room. Her voice was broken but steady. "I never wanted this. I never wanted cameras, contracts, or headlines. I just wanted to save him." Malik clenched his fists, torn between reaching for her and running from her. In the end, he did neither. He turned back, his eyes dark with conflict. His voice dropped, heavy as stone. "I can't do this." Amara's head snapped up, her tear-streaked face desperate. "Malik, please." But he didn't turn back. He opened the door and stepped into the storm, the rain drenching him instantly. He walked down the empty streets, water soaking his suit, his thoughts a battlefield of anger, shame, and longing. In the penthouse, Amara collapsed onto the floor, sobbing until her throat burned. The distance between them had never felt so final. She pressed a hand to her chest and whispered her brother's name, praying he would live even if her marriage did not. For Malik, the rain was both punishment and release. He let it soak through him as Amara's words echoed in his mind. "I would do anything if it means my brother lives." No matter how hard he tried to forget, her truth refused to fade. Hours later, when he returned, the city had quieted. He found her asleep on the sofa, her face tear-stained, her body curled into itself. He stood in the doorway, his heart heavy. Something inside him cracked, but he didn't wake her. Instead, he walked past her into the dark, knowing the breaking point had come. Nothing between them would ever be the same again. The days after that storm were heavy with silence. Malik buried himself in work, filling his hours with back-to-back meetings, investor calls, and endless damage control. Yet no matter how much he tried to compartmentalize, Amara's confession replayed in his mind. He saw her tears, heard her voice crack, and felt the sting of his own failure to see her truth sooner. One morning, before sunrise, Malik left the penthouse, not for his office, but for Houston. His driver dropped him quietly at the hospital where Amara had been sending money. The sterile corridors smelled of antiseptic, the polished floors echoing under his shoes as he walked with purpose. When he asked for the Daniels family, he was led to the pediatric ward. Inside, a boy no older than 12 lay pale and weak in a hospital bed, tubes and monitors surrounding him. The boy's eyes were tired, but when he noticed Malik, he managed a faint smile. "Are you Amara's husband?" he whispered. Malik's throat tightened as he nodded. "She talks about you," the boy said softly. "She says you're busy, but you're smart, and you can fix anything." Malik stood frozen, guilt and awe flooding him. Without a word, he reached into his coat and handed the doctor a signed authorization to cover every medical cost, including the surgery scheduled for the following week. His voice was low but firm. "Spare nothing." The doctor blinked in surprise, then nodded gratefully. Malik left before Amara's family could see him, his chest heavy yet lighter than it had felt in weeks. Back in Atlanta, Amara continued her quiet acts of kindness. Away from flashing cameras, she volunteered at a soup kitchen downtown. With her sleeves rolled up and her hair tied back, she ladled soup, offered warm smiles, and listened to stories from people who had nothing. The tabloids painted her as a villain, but here she was nothing but human. One evening, Malik arrived at the soup kitchen unannounced. He stood in the doorway watching her laugh with an elderly man as she filled his bowl. She looked more at peace in that moment than she ever had at a gala. Something stirred inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. tenderness. When she noticed him, her expression faltered, then softened. "You came," she said quietly. Almost in disbelief, Malik stepped forward. His tailored suit looked out of place among worn jackets and tired faces, but he didn't care. "I wanted to see what you do when the cameras aren't around." She looked at him for a long moment before answering. "This is who I am, Malik, not the girl in designer dresses. Just me." He nodded slowly, realizing how little he truly knew her. Over the following weeks, Malik began to change. He asked fewer questions about appearances and more about how she was feeling. He canceled meetings occasionally to walk with her through Piedmont Park. He listened to her stories about her father's lessons, her dreams before life turned into survival. Amara noticed the shift. At first she was cautious, but gradually she began to trust. One night they sat together on the balcony. The city spread beneath them like a sea of lights. Malik handed her a mug of tea instead of champagne. His gaze remained on the skyline as he spoke. "I used to think love was a weakness, but you make me wonder if I was wrong." Amara's chest tightened, tears glimmering in her eyes. "I used to think no one would ever see me beyond what I could give. But you make me hope I was wrong too." In that moment, the walls between them cracked further. The cold billionaire and the contract bride began to see each other not as obligations, but as two people scarred, yet yearning for something real. Their conversations grew deeper, their silences more comfortable, and though the world outside still raged with gossip, inside the penthouse a fragile bond was forming. Malik no longer saw Amara as a liability. He saw her as a mirror of resilience and sacrifice. Amara no longer saw Malik as an employer. She began to see him as a man capable of growth. It wasn't love declared, not yet, but it was love in the making. A slow fire forged through pain and redemption. The turning point came when Darius Shaw staged an extravagant charity gala at one of Atlanta's most prestigious hotels. The guest list was packed with investors, journalists, and celebrities, everyone eager to witness his spectacle. Darius knew Malik and Amara would attend, and he had prepared an attack designed to humiliate them in front of the entire elite circle. Malik arrived with Amara on his arm, both dressed impeccably. Cameras flashed wildly as they entered the golden ballroom, chandeliers blazing overhead. Outwardly, Malik was composed and regal, Amara radiant and poised. Beneath the surface, both carried the weight of tension. Malik knew Darius would strike, but he had chosen to face the night head-on. The evening began with cocktails and polished laughter, but anticipation lingered in the air. When Darius finally took the stage, he smiled like a predator. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice slick with confidence, "we are here to celebrate generosity. And what greater generosity than a billionaire who gives away not just his fortune, but his heart to a con artist." Gasps echoed through the crowd as whispers erupted. Darius projected doctored photographs and manipulated documents onto a giant screen, spinning a tale that painted Amara as a schemer who had preyed on Malik's loneliness. Amara's face drained of color. Her body stiffened, humiliation slashing through her as her secrets were dragged into the open in the cruelest way. For a moment, Malik stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on Darius. The room held its breath, waiting to see if he would deny or falter. Instead, Malik walked calmly onto the stage and took the microphone. His voice rang out strong, steady, and unshaken. "My wife," he said firmly, "is no con artist. She is the bravest woman I know." The room went silent. Every eye turned toward him. Malik's gaze swept across the crowd. "While you sit here judging, she has been sacrificing everything for her family. She agreed to marry me not for herself but to save her brother's life." Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Amara's eyes filled with tears as her hand rose to cover her mouth. Malik continued, his voice heavy with conviction. "She taught me what love truly means. Not the kind built on money or appearances, but the kind born from selflessness. If anyone here doubts her worth, then you doubt me. Because I stand with her." The tide shifted instantly. Whispers of gold digger faded, replaced by murmurs of admiration. Investors in the room exchanged approving nods, the balance of power turning back in Malik's favor. Cameras flashed, capturing Amara's tear-streaked face as she stared at her husband in raw disbelief and gratitude. Darius tried to speak again, but his words fell flat against the weight of Malik's declaration. No one was listening anymore. The narrative had changed. For weeks, Amara had endured Malik's suspicion and coldness, never expecting him to claim her in such a public, vulnerable way. But now, standing before the world, he was not just defending her, he was choosing her. Applause broke out, slow at first, then rising until the entire ballroom echoed with clapping. Some guests even rose to their feet. Amara's tears spilled freely as Malik turned to her, his eyes softer than they had ever been. And then, before the applause had even faded, Malik reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Dropping to one knee in front of the entire ballroom, his steady voice carried above the noise. "Amara Daniels. This time there is no contract, no obligation, no business deal. This is just me, a man broken and healed by your strength. Will you marry me for real?" The crowd gasped as cameras flashed wildly. Amara's hands trembled, her breath catching in her throat. For weeks she had wondered if she truly belonged in his world, if he would ever see her as more than a bargain. And now, under the blazing chandeliers in front of everyone who had doubted her, he was offering her his heart. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she nodded. "Yes, Malik." Her voice broke but carried across the room. A roar of applause filled the ballroom as Malik slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that silenced every whisper of doubt. For Amara, the cheering and flashes blurred away. All she felt was his embrace, warm, certain, and real. Later, as they slipped out of the gala hand in hand, she whispered, "Why now? Why after everything?" Malik smiled faintly. "Because I finally learned love isn't something you sign, it's something you give." Months later, life looked completely different. The noise of scandals, rumors, and boardroom battles had faded into the past. Malik had bought a secluded beach house on the quiet coast of California, far away from flashing cameras and relentless headlines. Here, waves rolled gently against the shore and the horizon stretched endless, painted in gold and rose by the setting sun. Amara stood barefoot on the porch in a flowing white dress, the sea breeze lifting her curls as she gazed at the ocean. Her hands rested on the gentle curve of her belly, a new life growing within her. The air smelled of salt and possibility. Malik stepped out behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. Together they watched the tide move in and out, the sound of waves steady and grounding. His voice was low, tender. "After everything we've been through, do you ever regret how it started?" Amara smiled softly, her eyes glistening. "Sometimes I wonder. But no, Malik. Because it led me to you." He kissed the side of her head, his voice firm with certainty. "Not for a moment. I don't regret a thing." She leaned into him, her tears this time not from pain but from joy. Behind them, the house glowed warmly, ready to be filled with laughter, family, and love. No longer bound by contracts or appearances, they had built something real, something born from sacrifice and trust, but sustained by choice. Malik tightened his arms around her as the waves crashed softly in the distance. "True love isn't a contract," he whispered. "It's a choice, and we choose each other." Amara closed her eyes, letting his words settle into her heart. In that moment, with the ocean as their witness, she knew every struggle, every sleepless night, every painful sacrifice had been worth it. Their story had begun with ink and obligation, but it ended with freedom and love. Together they had turned a bargain for survival into a bond strong enough to endure storms, scandals, and time itself. The billionaire and his contract bride had found their happily ever after, not because fate demanded it, but because they chose it.